And another one I'll read of my own fanfic shorts, is an Avengers one, specifically Steve Tony, even though it's not necessarily from their point of view, it's mostly just about them, but they're the focal point. So, and it's called Unconsciously. The summary says, Tony Stark and Steve Rogers fight like cats and dogs with each other, and like a well-armed machine against their enemies. But they are drawn into each other's blind spots until they realize how much they support each other, despite being unaware they're doing it. And boy, oh boy, does Clint hate that he's not allowed to say anything about it. It was late afternoon, close to sunset, but not yet twilight. It had been a quiet day for the Avengers. Sam and Natasha had just gotten back from an op that morning, and they and Clint spent the morning hanging out in the kitchen, icing bruises while playing Jenga. They have to know, Clint mutters with concentration, as he works out his choice of Jenga-branded pine, smirking at Sam as he frees the wood. They don't, Natasha replies casually before taking her turn. Sam looks over his shoulder for a moment. Really? You're trying to tell me that they have no idea what they're doing? He decides to make things easy on himself, and he takes his piece from higher up in the tower, around where the original top stood. I've checked, and you boneheads aren't going to say anything about it to them either, Natasha says, her threat properly veiled as she removes a block like it wasn't one of two pieces holding up the whole tower together, delicately relocating it to the top. Checked how, Nat? Especially if you don't want us to say anything, Clint frowns at the options of his next turn. That's what I'm talking about. How can they be all over each other like that and not know? You know they don't, and you know they don't know, Sam says, feeling like he just recited a tongue twister somehow. Because I'm a better spy than both of you. Clint looks like he's about to object, but then shrugs, and also removes a cheap piece of wood from the safer top of the tower, freezing as it leans slowly to one side before rebalancing itself. Also, he helped, Natasha stated as Bruce came around the corner, taking in the game of Jenga going on, and the looks on everyone's faces. No, Bruce says before going into the kitchen and pulling out an apple from the fridge, taking out a peeler and getting to work on his apple. He liked to do it when there was time on his hands. A fun little way, a small little meditation. We didn't say anything. Natasha made a reference to me as I came in. So whatever you're talking about, it's something I'm not a part of. No. We're talking about Tony and Steve on the couch, Clint says calmly as Sam goes back to contemplating his move. Bruce blinks for a moment, repeating Tony and Steve's names before realizing what the discussion about. Don't tell them, he states firmly. So everyone keeps saying, but why? Sam says, deciding to forget about the game for a moment in hopes the right brick will just jump out at him. You know how stupid they get around each other, Natasha replies with disinterest, talking at her normal level while Sam and Clint try to keep themselves quieter, considering how close they are to the two that they are currently talking about, and everyone is more than aware of how keen a sense of hearing Steve has. Yeah, when they're not arguing with each other, they're looking at each other like kick puppies. And would you keep it down? They can't hear us. They're both in their zones, Natasha replies. At this moment in time, Steve and Tony are on the couch. Tony is sat on the back into the back of the chair, his feet up on the coffee table, without shoes, as he usually does when he doesn't have to be in front of mature adults with mature adult jobs. Wholly absorbed in a Stark Industries tablet while a wall TV screen is offering additional data as he mutters to himself, writing on the tablet while he's reading what's on the TV screen, and going back again. The tablet is resting on Steve's shin, and Tony's free hand is resting on Steve's knee. Steve had initially sat down at the other end of the couch, sketchbook in hand and a set of pencils of varying hardnesses. The common area with its floor-to-ceiling windows in a room that was at least 2 whole floors not only offered the best light, but also the largest unbroken view of one half of Manhattan's skyline. So it was a common sight to see Steve somewhere in the common room area to recenter himself, especially after a hard-won fight. However, as Steve gets comfortable, and thinks more about what he's drawing, he ends up putting his feet up on the couch, and more often than not, in Tony's lap. Natasha and Bruce had been the first to notice it months ago. It seemed to happen shortly after Peter Parker had become a common feature in the tower, helping Tony with various small-scale projects. While Peter had been originally brought in as a benched member, someone to be backup on missions while also mentoring the kid while he developed his own superhero presence, though he was more regularly just hanging out around the tower and being Tony's gopher and a second pair of hands for Bruce while he was busy. Being in their zones means they have no idea, Sam asks. He still spent most of his time with Natasha, Steve, and Rhodey because, well, they both needed someone to commiserate when it came to their poor, stupid white boys. He'd also always found Tony just enough too flippant and disinterested to really get a comfortable beat on him. So he mostly left the billionaire alone, only hearing stories about him from Rhodey and the other Avengers. Well, it only really works if Tony's sitting down first, Bruce offers, peeling his apple. If Steve's here first, he usually just goes into the lab and works there, which was Tony. We aren't the ones who run away from their issues. Okay, that hurt. Sam retorts as Clint smirks. Still, you'd think Steve would at least realize what he's doing. I mean, Stark, sure, if he can't take you apart and rebuild you Iron Legion style, why bother with the peons? But Steve? He's always about being respectful and lecturing Stark or scolding him or just straight up arguing with him. Boy's a bit of a dom, hey? Clint says casually, ignoring the look Natasha offers him, and to be amused at Bruce's exasperated look. Hey, Favu! I hope you're interested in what I'm reading right now with one of my fanfiction. It's kind of old and probably crap now. Well, now that's stuck in my head. Thank you, Clint. Bruce sighs as Clint tips an imaginary hat to the scientist. I think that's because he draws until the sun's gone completely down and leaves before he even realizes how he was. And like you said, Tony only notices something when he's interested. There's a pause and he speaks up before anyone can say it. Or wants to ignore something he doesn't want to deal with. If he wasn't planning on sharing anything, he was sharing anything. Well, why is this worded so poorly? Right. No, I've got it now. I'm sorry, am I speaking too fast? I'll slow down for you. If he wasn't planning on sharing anything about the fact he was dying from palladium poisoning, what makes you think Tony's going to say anything about the fact he's sharing his space with his boyhood idol and biggest rival? Natasha says while she watches the Jenga tower sway back and forth subtly. Palladium poisoning? Man, I've got to start reading those files. It's not in there anymore. Stark deleted them, Clint offers up before looking right past Sam at the pair in the living room, causing everyone to follow his gaze. Tony rubs at his eyes and stretches for a moment before tapping Steve's leg twice. Steve responds by pulling his legs back and moving his drawing pad to rest on his lap while he uses his legs as an easel. Tony stands, pocketing the stylus and dropping his tablet where he was sitting, and then strolls towards the kitchen, stopping when he's realized he's being watched. Something on my face, or are we aiming for something more of a Norman Rockwell revival? Tony says with a raised eyebrow at them all. Bruce and Natasha don't even look at all ashamed at staring at him. We were talking about whose turn it is for dinner. And I guess it's my turn. Tony asks, continuing his journey to the coffee machine. It is if you're offering. Natasha replies. I'm thinking of that Thai place we tried last time, says Bruce, with Natasha sounding her own agreement. Tony shrugs, clearly not bothered by the line of thinking, as he watches his mug fill up with coffee while tossing 2 cubes of sugar as it fills. Well, then, let's get everyone's order, Tony says decisively, looking at the fridge, clearly looking like he's contemplating a snack before dinner. Hey, Stark, do you know where Steve is? Clint gets a sharp look from Natasha before he adds, so we can ask him what he wants. Since when did I become his keeper? Nat usually knows where he is, Tony says casually. He's usually in the common room at this time. Tony stares flatly at Clint as Natasha answers the question. Some hawker you are if he's right over there. Tony rolls his eye and starts to leave. Going to the lab. Bruce knows what I want. He leaves with his coffee in his hand, picking up his tablet before knocking Steve on the knees with it. Tired tonight, Captain. Steve answers non-committally, so Tony uses the side of the tablet against his knee for a reactionary kick out of what he was expecting. A kick out of what he was expecting, which was snapping Steve out of his focus. Pardon? Ty, dinner, Bruce, ordering. Follow? Tony says very emphatically, slowly adding hand gestures. Very funny, Tony. Then both he and Tony look at Clint when he calls out to Tony. Who calls out to Tony.
Teddy needs moisture.
Who then, with clear ASL, says to Tony. Hang on. With clear ASL, signs to Tony. Yeah, for the hand gestures. You know that's not how it's signed, jackass. Tony merely raises an eyebrow at him and replies with his own. I wasn't telling you, so butt out, before he disappeared off to the elevator to go to the lab. Natasha offers Sam and Clint a look, and I told you so look, as Steve comes in. Booby! I should drink, yes. I didn't know Tony could sign, ponders Steve as he looks at the Jenga tower and expertly removes a brick and places it on the top. He didn't before I moved in, Clint answers. Languages aren't exactly hard for Tony, Natasha offers. I'm pretty sure he gets fluent as a hobby. Even though Natasha has worked as Tony's assistant for a short time as a way to get close to him, Natasha was impressed with just how many languages Tony had under his belt before she met him. He was fluent in German, Italian, French, and Japanese, and he was able to get by easily enough with Spanish and Mandarin. Doesn't make it any less surprising, Steve says. He learned himself just how to get fluent in German. Tony just as easily spoke to German authorities in Stuttgart after cleaning Loki's clock there. He realized Tony understood French when he caught Steve muttering to himself in French and kindly asked him to leave while Steve, more slack-jawed than expected to be in this situation. So, Ty, thank you. I really enjoyed it. Look, she can do this. Yes, I'm really in love with this silly little hand wave. So, Ty, Steve says with a coy little smile. He doesn't know he has when he learns something. He says with a coy little smile that he doesn't know he has when he learns something about Tony. Sam and Clint are just as in awe of how unaware these two are. And I think this only has 2 chapters because I never really finished anything with it, so I will read that, and that'll be the end of my read this chapter, and it'll be the end of my stream for the day. This one's summary is the summary for this chapter is, it's a calm and easy day for Tony. Bruce seems to be contemplating an anthropology doctorate to add to the pile. Mr. Stark, Peter says as he reaches his arm into the hole in the project Tony is getting Peter to work on. I think I can feel those cables. Feeling's not going to pull them out. If they feel right, pull them. After a pause, Tony adds, gently, I just soldered them and I don't need you ripping them out. Okay, sure, I can do that, Peter says as he slowly pulls his arm out of the hole and then stops. It stopped. Are you sure I shouldn't pull? Only if you want to break it, just wait. Tony approaches with something like a gripper stick for getting things off high shelves, but he dips it into a separate hole and digs around until he grabs some wires and angles them towards Peter's hand. Here, take these, twist them together, and then close the circuits. How will I know if I did it right? Peter asks him with a curious look. You don't get burnt. Some of the lights stay on. That's the way it goes, isn't it? Tony says, scratching his cheek. Oh, I mean, yeah, when you don't have much to work with, I guess, Peter replies. You know, if you keep standing there and not connecting things, you really won't have much to work with. What am I paying you for? Whoa, wait, you're paying me? Peter asks, looking surprised. Not if you keep talking. Right, okay, sure thing, Mr. Stark. Peter starts fidgeting around using his single hand to make the right connections as Tony goes back to his main desk to check some numbers that have come up with the latest tests in the new telecrop species. He can feel Steve behind him without having to hear him speak. You are paying him, right? Steve asks. Interns aren't included in the Minimum Wage Act, Tony replies without interest, as he leans in to double-check a few numbers. Tony, he has a trust fund that it would be his when he turns 18, so technically I am paying him. Just, there's no legal agreement. Tony answers like he's being nagged. Does he know that? He does. Sort of. He can feel the silence dripping from Steve, but keeps his eyes on the screen. She knows I'm putting something aside for him, she just doesn't know how much. Tony finally answers, trying not to sound like Steve is making him squirm. Tony, I know you think that's a good idea, but not everybody likes being surprised by large sums of money out of the blue. Especially not when they live in Queens. Or Brooklyn, Steve reasons. And yet, people still play the lottery. Tony offers glibly. That isn't the same and you know it. Tony groans at Steve's answer before peering over the monitor at Peter. Yo, Charlotte! Tony shouts. Yes, Mr. Stark? Steve mutters about why Peter should know even how Peter should even know Tony was talking to him. You know you're being paid $30 an hour, right? Tony says. Excuse me, what? Ouch! Peter flinches away from the wires that clearly shocked him. Are you serious, Mr. Stark? Pay attention to what you're doing. And why are you listening to me? And he's serious. I'm the one with the checkbook. The kid looks overwhelmed for a minute before going back to finding the wires and securing them together. It isn't lost on Steve that Tony doesn't give Peter an actual answer, but he at least knew Jarvis would have recorded the audio that might be useful in the fairly unlikely event Tony doesn't pay Peter anything. You're more than just a checkbook, Tony. Steve offers, looking over Tony's shoulder. I'm also a landlord. Tony combats. Landlords charge rent, counters Steve. Avenging is rent, returns Tony. No, it's not, spikes Steve in return. He tries to keep it playful, knowing well enough that Tony's inability to proportionately show affection or receive honest compliments has led to arguments before, and Steve is just not wanting to deal with that right now. Sure it is. And if it isn't, I'm sure I can have Miss Potts draw up something to if it makes you feel better. Tony sends off an email and then turns to look up at Steve, his hips casually on the desk, his arms crossed to keep a barrier between them as he tilts his head. What's got you down here today, Rogers? Clint, Buck, and Roddy are watching football. Loudly. Steve says somewhat evasively. Catching up on what he's missed, huh? I mean, I'm not interested in football, but even I know it's the off-season. Steve nods at the question. Well, don't know why you came here, I mean. Tony gestures nebulously around to reference the rock music bellowing in the background. Kept at teen-safe levels, but still loud enough where shouting is almost needed, but not quite. At least it's consistent. There's something about the look on Steve's face as he speaks that Tony can read to suggest sudden bursts of cheering and screams isn't exactly what he's in the mood for right now, but neither is silence. So he shrugs non-committally and turns back to his computer. Mikasa Sukasa and all that, Tony says, forcing himself to not try and somehow do something to fix how Steve's feeling, knowing full well he wouldn't be able to do anything to comfort Steve. Unexpectedly, Steve puts a hand on Tony's shoulder and gives it a squeeze. Thanks, Tony. Yeah. Tony waves him off, pushing his flippant nature to the forefront, dismissing the gratitude for his own mental peace, while steadfastly making sure not to look at Steve. He misses the look on Steve's face that suggests he wants to say something else. It hangs in the air for a moment before he turns and heads to one of the couches scattered around the place. He picks up the blanket that's discarded on it, as Tony and Bruce are both known to nap here from time to time, and folds it neatly before resting it on the arm of the couch, before sitting down to read a book that was recommended to him by Bruce. About a world on the back of elephants who stand atop a space turtle, while he kept his art supplies beside him, just in case. Mr. Stark, it's lit up. Does it look Mr. Stark? Peter doesn't look at Tony as he speaks, but he does look at the words the LED lights display that read, "Good job, kid." Mr. Stark, you said this was important? I don't get it, Peter says, sounding more than a little lost confused, as Tony leaves his desk, puts his hands in his pockets and strolls over. Looks important to me. A metal sphere that says, "Good job," is important? Peter asks as he gestures to the spherical object he'd been battling with for most of the afternoon. Only now does he notice there seems to be some cheesy royalty-free music playing from the inside of the sphere somewhere. "Did you do what I asked you to do?" Tony asks. "Of course. I mean, well, you said it was meant to light up, and well, those are lights?" Peter offers, realizing that even for him that sounded kind of lame. "Take the win, Parker. Just because I treat you like one of the bots doesn't mean you don't deserve praise." Tony nudges Peter with his shoulder, then turns back to his own work. "You're done for the day. Go home. Pick something up for your aunt on the way home." Peter continues to stare, dumbfounded at the whole thing, slowly making the connection that Tony built this whole thing specifically for him. Not only that, but he had helped him work on it the whole week, and never realized it was happening. His face slowly lights up brighter than the LED display he's in front of before spinning on his heel, headed to the elevator, thanking Tony over the music. Tony could feel Steve's eyes on him for a long time, and it prickled him deeply. He was almost about to snap at Steve before realizing that Steve wasn't actually looking at him, glancing over his own shoulder. Tony could see that he had moved on from his book, and now he was drawing. He watched him for a long moment before going back to his work. If there was a slight smile on his face, he would deny with every fiber of his being as he let himself get lost in his work again. Most of the people in the MCU who are smart are also stupid as fuck. I love them so much. Tony. He could smell coffee under his nose and looked down at it to see a fresh, hot mug. That had him glance at the owner of the voice. It was Bruce. "Jarvis, time," is all Tony says before drinking the coffee. "It is 1 a.m, sir. You have been working for 7 hours straight, 20 hours total in the last 24 hours. Tony ignores the answer and drains the cup. "Lose paper, rock, scissors, huh?" Tony asks Bruce as he gestures for the work to be saved. Just woke up from a bad bit of sleep, actually. And after all this time, I know that you'd be here." "New designs?" Bruce leans against the desk. Tony leans back in his chair and runs a hand through his hair. "Stark Industries," he answers, drumming his fingers against the mug. "Pepper only signs off on the grown-up work. At some point, I became head of R&D again. Luckily, I ignore the department until they send me their final work and approve it or send it back. They don't need me for most of the part. I really should just give them a raise." "You're smiling," Bruce points out, while having a gentle smile on his own face while he cuddles his own mug in his hands. "If you're going to lie, at least make it sound convincing," Tony snorts, knowing that Bruce meant it to tell Tony that he looks and seems happy. Bruce just takes a long drink from his own coffee mug, looking past Tony. How long has Steve been here?" he asks with a raised eyebrow. Tony swiveled in his seat, and some ambient lighting increased just enough to illuminate Steve out like a light draped on the arm of the couch, pencils on the floor, his art book looking a hair from falling off of Steve's lap. "Huh," Tony says blandly. "Huh?" Bruce repeats, exasperated at Tony's lack of interest. I figured he'd left by now." Tony shrugs while watching Steve with a raised eyebrow. "You knew he was here?" Bruce asked. "He wanted to get away from Clint, Barnes, and Rhodey watching football," he answers. "Football, huh?" Bruce blinks, then cleans his glasses slowly. "Right, football. That would be noisy. And so he came here. Bruce spoke in a way that reminded Tony of now long-retired professors who were contemplating someone's wrong answers while trying to wonder how they got there. Brucey Byrne? Oh, I was out most of the day. Well, you know how I feel about you, Tony, and your operating requirements. I'm surprised that Steve would trade that for football. Look, I stopped trying to figure him out when I realized it was better for my blood pressure. I bet. Bruce looks contemplative. Think we should wake him up? Probably. We shouldn't let a centurion sleep on the couch. Bruce didn't move as Tony spoke. Tony rolled his eyes and stood up, stretching his own old bones out before going over to Steve, saying his name quietly before talking to him, which made Bruce realize that Tony knew how to wake up Steve. The man that he spends at least 30% of his time arguing with, and Tony knows how to approach a sleeping veteran. For Bruce, this is very telling, even more so when Steve doesn't stir, and Tony, who must have forgotten Bruce was there, runs his fingers slowly through Steve's hair and quietly asks him to wake up, which he finally does. Tony steps back, offering distance as Steve blinks his eyes open slowly. Tony's space brought Steve a level of comfort where he was able to be in a deep, peaceful sleep. Now that's interesting, Bruce thought. Huh, he says to himself as he watches Tony tease Steve for falling asleep on the couch. Steve yawning, but smiling back at Tony, teasing back. They aren't actually... Tony must have heard Bruce thinking out loud and looks at him curiously. Bruce shakes his head. I'm starting to feel sleepy again. He waves to Steve, who, unlike Tony, at least looks a little shy about being caught asleep on the couch by Bruce. Yeah, night. Say goodnight to Nat for me. Tony smirks teasingly. Good night, Tony. He turns and starts to leave. Not even a kiss goodnight? Tony smirks. Again. Not for you. Ah, he's keeping it for Nat, Tony says playfully at Steve, who looks a little ruffled at the comment before standing up. Don't you think you tease Bruce too much? Steve quietly chides. Is he green? Tony, you can't keep using that as a reason. Steve sighs. And yet, Tony pauses to let the words sink in before adding, you should go back to sleep. You'll be up again in 3 hours for your run. Funny. I don't think I'll need it. I'm feeling pretty awake and settled. Tony looks dramatically taken aback by Steve's word. Jarvis, get the doctor on the line. Better yet, call Bruce back. There's something clearly wrong with our red, white, and blue. I'll make sure to do so the moment Captain Rogers appears to be in any form of actual distress, sir. Buzzkill. Tony stretches again, and once again feels Steve watching him, but opts to ignore it. I can already feel you itching to say it. Don't worry, I'm going. Going? Steve looks like he's lost part of the conversation somewhere. Tony turns to him mid-stretch, his hands together as he reaches up and feels his shoulder blades loosen up. Weren't you about to nag me about going to bed? He asks with an incredulous look on his face. Oh, right, the time. You'll have morning meetings. You've been up late enough as it is. Stop conspiring with Jarvis to give me a better sleep schedule. Now pick up your pencils and get out of my shop, Tony orders before going over to the elevator, knowing it'll take him to his room. What was I even thinking? Steve mutters to himself before tidying up his pencils and staring at the art book, with the various shapes Tony made with his body as he worked. Tony was exceedingly expressive, which made him a great human form practice. There was nothing more to it than that. The only reason he hid that from everyone was, despite their actual ages and appearances, he lived in a building full of 15-year-olds who all had super abilities in some form or another, and nothing else better to do. Maybe he should go for that run.